It means a lot to be here as a city employee and to be able to introduce the Climate Action Plan update for 2015 as we're trying to really live into and work into all of these values and principles that we've been talking about for quite a few years. So I'm going to pass it on to Kyle Diesner, who is a climate and energy policy analyst at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So thank you.
So there's one other thing that Desiree didn't mention about this building that I think is worth noting, because it's symbolic of the transition we've seen in Portland over the last 20 years. And over that 20 years, the sorority sisters were working to make this project happen. It was a very long duration to get this off the ground. But this was an abandoned gas station. And Portland has seen a 29% decline in gasoline sales per person since 1990. That's huge, 29% per person decline in gasoline sales. And so gasoline stations like this, many of them went out of business. And they took this space and transformed it into an amazing community asset. And that's something that they're very proud of, and I'm very proud of as well. So thank you for joining. Oh, go ahead.
All right, whoever's from Portland Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta in the audience. Just
Sorry, I kept looking over.
Yeah.
So there is this outdated idea that economic growth and vibrant communities are at odds with taking action on climate change. But Portland has really proven that that is not true, and in fact the opposite. In the 70s, Portland had over 180 days of air quality violations. You can see in the photo there. In the 70s, we were committed to tearing down inner city neighborhoods and building freeways. We have completely transformed that. Like America, we were becoming car-centric. There were plans to build a 10-story parking lot on this lot in the center, in the heart of downtown. Who knows where this is?
Pioneer Meyer Frank parking garage.
Yes, it is. And now it's Pioneer Courthouse Square. Yeah. Leaders and community organizers who came before us made bold decisions to set our city on a new course. Similar bold decisions turned Harbor Drive into Waterfront Park, took what was going to be a freeway to Mount Hood and invested in our first light rail line. Portland has a history and a legacy of leadership on climate change. And today we face a new threat, climate change, the greatest environmental challenge of the 21st century. It poses a serious threat not just to Oregon's natural resources, our rivers and lakes, our forests, our mountain snow, but also to our health and our jobs. Portland and Multnomah County are global leaders in this transition, and we have to look at this particular threat as an opportunity, as vast amounts of money will be made and saved in our transition to a low-carbon future. Because we were one of the first to build a light rail system, to install green roofs on our buildings, to invest in active transportation, and to find funding solutions to weatherize our homes and put solar on our rooftops, Portland businesses are now positioned to export low-carbon goods and services to other places around the world. It's part of who we are. It's in our DNA as Portlanders. And you know, we have a history of planning around climate change. Going back to 1993, the first carbon dioxide reduction strategy, Portland was the first city in the United States to adopt local carbon reduction goals. And we've made incredible progress since that time. This particular plan that we're here to talk about today is the fourth generation climate action plan, building on this long legacy of work that has come before us. In the draft plan that we're going to talk about tonight, provides a roadmap for communities to achieve an 80% reduction in emissions below 1990 levels by 2050. And we have an interim goal of 40% by 2030. And we've already made remarkable progress. And let's just take a quick glance at some of these stats. So I already told you 29% fewer gallons of gasoline sold, but 11% less energy used per person in our homes. 6% of people bike to work. That is 9 times the national average. We have a 70% recycling rate, also a national leader. 100 million rides each year on public transit, 5,600 electric cars in Oregon, 1,600 of which are here in the city of Portland. 3,000 solar systems have been installed since 1990 in Portland. 250 green buildings, over 400 eco-roofs covering 20 acres. That's just been in the last several years, very recent phenomenon. 7,400 acres cleared of invasive plants, 3 million new trees planted. And the last one is something that we're proud of at the city, is really investing in energy efficiency in terms of our city operations. We saved $6 million a year, taxpayer money, $6 million a year saved because of efficiency improvements. Examples include LED traffic lights, these new LED street lights that you're starting to see roll out across the city. So we're on our way. And if you look at this data, it's quite compelling to me as someone who lives with this stuff. But Multnomah County has a 14% reduction in emissions below 1990 levels. The nation as a whole is over 7% above 1990 levels. We do things differently in Portland. Investments that have helped us reduce emissions are the same things that make people want to live here as well. They help create livable neighborhoods that are walkable, with shopping, restaurants, parks. Investment in transit and bikeways, restoration and protection of our natural areas like Forest Park, the Willamette Greenway, the Columbia Slough, homes and buildings that are more efficient, more comfortable. But, meanwhile, we've accommodated 200,000 more residents and created 75,000 more jobs. And that is what's really impressive. We've achieved a 14% reduction in emissions while also growing our economy and growing our population. And that may be entirely unprecedented. But we still have a lot of work to do. And so I'm sorry to burst this bubble of enthusiasm. We have a goal, 80%. We're a long ways from that at 14%. This is the number that climate scientists have said we need to achieve to avert the worst impacts of climate change. We've got a lot of work to do ahead of us, but we've proven that we can do this and that we're on the right path. And I think the trajectory is pointing in the right direction. And so that's promising. We must have a plan that identifies the next steps and regularly monitors our progress to adapt to the rapidly changing world around us. And one of the benefits of planning is that we can leverage this particular opportunity in time to respond in ways that create local jobs, advance equity, improve public health, protect and restore our natural systems, and enrich the quality of life for all residents of Portland. Actions to reduce emissions and prepare for the impacts of climate change must result in healthy, prosperous, resilient, and equitable city. For example, increasing safe, accessible, active transportation options as walking, biking, and taking transit improves opportunities for physical activity, reduces air pollution, reduces the risk of crash-related injury. In turn, these impacts decrease obesity, chronic diseases, and respiratory ailments. What benefits the climate also benefits our communities, our health, our environment. It's a win-win across the board. Prosperity, also important. Climate action policies and programs can strengthen the local economy by driving demand for innovative products and services. This building is a testament to that. Already businesses and individuals have taken advantage of these opportunities. Multnomah County is home to some of the nation's leading developers, builders, architects, engineers, product manufacturers. There are over 12,000 clean tech jobs in Multnomah County, including green building, solar, weatherization. Local bike manufacturers, you might not know this, I found this statistic compelling. Local bike manufacturers contribute $90 million to our local economy and include 1,500 jobs. Who knew that? It's kind of amazing. Resiliency is also an important aspect of responding to climate change and preparing for the worst impacts that we'll face. The natural environment, trees, rivers, streams, fish, wildlife, can greatly benefit from the actions that we're going to take. Strategies that minimize the severity of climate impacts or cause them to occur more gradually, can alleviate stress on these natural resources. This helps natural systems be more resilient and to be more resistant to pests and diseases that we may face in a changing climate. At the same time, restoration and preservation of forests and wetlands can make less susceptible to natural disasters like wildfires and landslides. Two problems that are expected to be worse in the coming years. And the last topic on this that I'm going to discuss is equity, and it's something that I'm personally really passionate about, and it's also special to be in this space. Succeeding on climate goals must involve everybody. Reaching an 80% reduction requires broad support and engagement and participation from all members of our community. Everyone has a part to play, and currently, everyone has not had equitable access to the benefits and opportunities that have come from climate action. Communities of color and low-income populations in Portland have historically been underserved by climate programs and investments and underrepresented in decision-making on climate policy. This plan seeks to change that course. These inequities are the result of ongoing institutional bias and historical discrimination. Climate change is likely to amplify inequities, as some of our most vulnerable citizens are going to disproportionately bear the burden. Low-income citizens, elderly citizens. Programs and policies and investments must engage impacted communities, reduce harm, and ensure that low-income populations and communities of color equally share in the economic, social, and environmental benefits of this work. Another aspect of our climate action plan, which is a little different this time around, we're looking at consumption. Historically, we have tracked our emissions since 1990 using the traditional methodology of looking at energy used in our homes and buildings, transportation fuels used in our vehicles, and methane emissions from landfill waste. This is an international protocol that governs how local governments do these type of inventories. Cities all over the world do inventories in this way. But this approach does not account for global emissions that are the result of the things that Portlanders consume. The goods we buy, the services we consume, and the food that we eat. They're all produced in other places around the world, and those emissions are not accounted in our inventory. So this time around, we've taken a new approach, and we're exploring consumption. Consumption-based emissions account for emissions associated with all the goods and services consumed by Multnomah County residents. This approach considers the full life cycle of goods and services, from their production, their processing, their shipping, their distribution, their sale at retail stores, and then ultimately consumers buy them and they use them, and they sometimes generate more emissions. And then they end up in a landfill at the end of life where they continue to generate emissions. So we need to be mindful of this life cycle and the full impact of the goods we consume. When we add carbon emissions produced elsewhere to our local inventory, say for example the emissions used to manufacture my iPhone or this laptop, or my shirt that was made in Vietnam, or the hamburger I ate earlier, cows from Brazil, right? Emissions produced all over the world. If we add those to our emissions produced locally, it's nearly double. So the impact is huge. It's tremendous, and it can't be ignored. The consumption-based inventory offers insight into a wider range of opportunities to reduce emissions by making more efficient use of existing goods, vehicles, and buildings. We need to make it easier for people to fix and maintain and borrow and share everyday goods. Our businesses need to create quality, lasting products and use less carbon-intensive supply chains. The 2015 Climate Action Plan is a roadmap to cut emissions by 80%. We have a menu of actions that need to be completed or significantly underway in the next 5 years. And those actions are organized into these topic categories. There's boards in the back that summarize some of those actions. We also have we'll have opportunities for everyone to comment on handwritten comment cards, which I think you might have found on your chairs. Do people get comment cards?
They're at the front.
They're at the front, okay. And so I'm going to just run through each of these sections pretty quickly and just give you a sense of the kind of actions that are in there. You can also see the actions on the boards up there, and we actually, in the little packets hanging from the boards, are full lists of all the actions for every section. So before I move into the quick overview of what's in the plan, I just want to see if there's any questions that I can respond to, make sure that everyone is tracking along. Yes, sir.
I know you'll probably come to this, but I just noticed that from reading on the internet that final comments I think are supposed to be in by April the 10th or something.
Yes,
like
that's correct.
Is there a projected date for when
Yep.
it's officially submitted and I guess voted on by the city?
Yeah, so that's actually my last slide, so I'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to make you wait and hold on to that thought.
All right.
Yes, sir.
So I've been trying to get a handle on how serious this problem is. Can you tell me how much the Earth has warmed in the last, say, 15 years?
Well, no, I can't. I'm not a climate scientist, so
I thought you were.
wouldn't be in a position to.
Thought you were deep into climate since you're.
Warming.
How much has Oregon warmed in the last 15 years?
When we look at the climate science, we tend to look on longer time frames, and so we've had about 2 degrees of warming over the last 100 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, but during, for example, the last ice age, we were 9 degrees cooler. So, and in Oregon, we can pull that information and look specifically at Oregon, our temperature has gone up.
Yeah, but the only thing significant here is the amount that's due to man's CO2, and that's only since basically 1950. So how much has the Oregon warmed or the Earth warmed since 1950, which is really the starting point for any effect that man has had?
2 degrees.
Not since 1950. Because you just said 2 degrees since the little ice age.
2 degrees since the last 100 years. So we've been generating carbon emissions for longer than 50 years.
Yeah, but it's only been significant for 50 years according to the IPCC.
Yeah, so, but over that period of time, since over 100 years, it's been 2 degrees.
But that's not man.
But that's not the discussion tonight.
Sir, I don't think anybody else is here to debate whether climate change is real. We're definitely interested in what else they have to say. Thank you.
Are you going to take comments at the end too? Or
Yes, and everyone will have access to comment cards where they can record
when you're
stuff.
done, because I want to hear the whole thing before I say it.
Yes.
One last question or a comment. Since you're moving with the presentation has been about the past and you're moving to the future.
Yes.
I have a comment about the past that must be said because it didn't come out clear in the presentations. And that is when you talk about, and especially when you talk about the progress that's been made in Portland, it almost implied that that just happened or happened as a result of government. But there's 2 projects that you referred to in the slides, and one was the Mount Hood Freeway, and the other was the Pioneer Courthouse. Had to do with citizen participation
and community
had to
organizing.
Do with community
Absolutely.
organizing by
Absolutely.
the local people, and I know because I was there.
Yeah.
And I was in those marches and I was in those fights
Yes,
to stop
absolutely.
that Mount Hood Freeway and to prevent that parking lot that's now Pioneer Square from just turning into a parking lot.
Yep.
There were active people that were involved in that. So all the credit doesn't go to government by a long shot.
Absolutely. And throughout my presentation, I've noted that it takes the work of all of us together collectively. And I think I even addressed community organizing when I mentioned those. But I absolutely believe in what you just said. So moving into these chapters at a high level, buildings and energy, single largest contributor to climate change in terms of emissions produced locally, 40% of our local emissions. And some of you may be surprised to know that our electricity mix is dominated by fossil fuels. Nearly 70% of electricity is generated from coal and natural gas, where Portland is really an outlier for the rest of the nation. I mean, the rest of the Pacific Northwest, which has received much more hydropower. So reducing emissions from buildings and energy requires 2 primary changes. One, investments in efficiency, making sure that our homes are weatherized, our buildings are high performing, and that we have efficient appliances, efficient lighting. The second is a shift towards cleaner energy sources. So shifting towards natural gas, away from oil, shifting towards renewables like wind and solar. And for our plan, our primary actions that we're exploring around buildings and energy, or that we're proposing, include energy performance reporting. You may have heard about this for the commercial sector, for large commercial buildings. We're also proposing energy performance reporting for homes and residences. And this is essentially a miles per gallon, right, for your buildings. So prospective tenants, for prospective home buyers, can see how a building is actually going to perform and make an educated choice about what they're getting into before they buy or rent. Community solar is about giving solar access to everybody. Solar is an incredibly democratic resource. It shines on everyone, but not everyone can afford to install solar. So creating avenues for more people to have solar is really important to us. Making sure that we use tools like community solar, which give folks who live in apartments or folks who do not have solar access on their homes or can't afford the full cost of solar, the opportunity to buy and benefit from a solar system that's located elsewhere. Price on carbon, as we've seen with many things in the world, pricing things tends to reduce their consumption. In addition, a price on carbon needs to consider the regressive impacts on low-income households and needs to mitigate for that. Energy use in new buildings. We need better standards for new construction. Make sure that our new construction buildings are as efficient and high-performing as possible. And then lastly, we need a fossil fuel export policy. The City of Portland currently does not have a policy, and we need a policy so that we can make informed decisions based on that policy. Urban form and transportation is the second largest contributor to local emissions at nearly 40%, 37% of local emissions come from the transportation sector. The transportation of goods and people are influenced by three primary factors. One, overall urban form, so how far someone has to commute between their home and their work, or to stores or restaurants, etc. Two, how people and goods are moved around, so are they moved on foot or by bike or by bus or by truck or rail. And three, the carbon content of the fuels we use to power those vehicles, so like gasoline and diesel versus electricity and biofuels. For our transportation proposed actions, we're looking at stable and long-term funding. How many of you are familiar with Portland's and Multnomah County actually gas tax that we all pay at the pump? Everyone pays into it when you buy gas, and that money is used to pay for roads and road maintenance and transportation investments. We also get federal highway trust funds. Both of those funding sources are in serious decline, as you saw the 29% decrease in per-person gasoline sales. So our revenue that funds road maintenance is starting to dry up. That's good from a carbon perspective, but bad because we have to find a new funding source to support the long-term maintenance of that infrastructure. We need healthy, connected neighborhoods. We have a goal that 80% of Portland residents can access, who will live in healthy, connected neighborhoods. And that's defined where walking is the preferred mode of travel for trips 1 mile or less, and biking is preferred mode of travel for 3 miles or less. Reducing traffic, investing in transit, walking, bicycle infrastructure, and increasing pedestrian safety are critical aspects of creating healthy and connected neighborhoods. Third, the shift to low carbon fuels. So moving towards biofuels, seeing an increase in how much we're using ethanol and biodiesel, as well as a shift towards electricity, and liquefied petroleum gas is another cleaner burning fuel that we can use in vehicles.
No.
Why no, please?
Because a lot of methane is produced. Methane is an extremely dangerous greenhouse gas. And
in what sense? Methane is produced in what? like biofuels? Because I know biofuels aren't,
No, and I was talking about natural gas.
okay, because the production of biofuels is a total waste of energy.
Yeah, how much energy reduction do we get from using biofuel instead of standard fuel?
Depends on the fuel.
Yeah.
Just national average. National average would do.
I don't have the statistic, but I can certainly look it up and provide it.
It's close to zero savings.
So, moving on. The next chapter is consumption and solid waste, and I talked about this a little bit, so I think I'll go pretty quickly over this. So the bottom line is the things that we buy matter. Our actions in this area are around helping residents understand carbon impacts of their consumption choices and making simple changes to meet their needs. This could include renting and sharing, fixing and reusing goods, or choosing a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables as opposed to red meat. We want to expand recycling and composting programs in multifamily dwellings. We want to reduce the total amount of waste we generate. So that not only means reduce the amount of waste that's going to the landfill by increasing recycling and composting, but also reducing the amount of material that requires recycling and composting to begin with through strategies like minimizing food waste, repairing and reusing materials, and using durable instead of disposable items. The next chapter is food and agriculture. And what we eat matters, and in fact what we eat matters much more than how far it travels to get to our plate. 84% of carbon emissions associated with food come from food production. And that's the energy that's used for irrigation, energy used to make fertilizers, to process food, to package food, and to before it ever reaches our grocery store. And some foods like beef, as you can see on this chart, are much more carbon intensive than grains, vegetables, and fruits. Some of the actions we're working on around food and agriculture include increased access to affordable fresh fruits and vegetables, reducing consumption of highly processed and packaged foods, helping residents to gain the skills and have the opportunity to grow their own food through their own backyards or in community gardens, and build knowledge to help make lower carbon food choices. Another important aspect of climate change is urban forest and natural systems. Trees and other vegetation are critical elements of our efforts to prepare for the coming impacts of climate change. But they also help us reduce carbon emissions by keeping the city cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter, and they sequester carbon. Improved access to nature can also lead to increased physical activity for walking, biking, and other outdoor recreation. Expanding the urban forest and protecting and restoring natural areas also create opportunities to address existing disparities for low-income populations and communities of color related to some neighborhoods in North Portland particularly that have fewer large healthy trees, limited access to parks and nature, we see that heavily in East Portland, and issues with poor air quality, which we see all along the I-5 corridor and the Columbia corridor. Some of the actions we're exploring around urban forest and natural systems include planting more trees and keeping them healthy, so tree maintenance, removing pavement, depaving, and creating more space for vegetation. This helps, one, with infiltration of stormwater into the soil, keeping stormwater out of our sewer system, and it doesn't have to be treated at the wastewater treatment plant, but also creating more green space, which help handle urban heat island effect. Climate change preparation is another aspect of this work. Portland's future is projected to include hotter, drier summers with more heat waves and warmer winters with more potential for intense rain events. These changes are likely to make issues like flooding, landslides, wildfires, fires, and heat-related illness much worse. Preparing for climate change requires an approach that monitors the emerging science, and tracks trends, and promotes flexible strategies that allow us to adjust to changes over time. It also requires understanding how these impacts affect some of the most vulnerable in our community, such as heat, poor air quality, flooding. The city and the county are prioritizing climate preparation work in areas where we see elderly populations and low-income populations. And some of the actions we're working on are to reduce the health impacts of heat waves and wildfires in the summer, cooling of streams and wetlands, and minimizing flooding and landslide risks in the wintertime. These are all problems we currently face today. We expect to face them more in the future. So a lot of this work is continuing what we're already doing more aggressively and monitoring how we need to adapt going forward. Engagement and outreach. Getting to this gentleman's point in the back, we must do this together. It takes community organizing. It takes local governments. There's a role for everybody. Many local residents and businesses and organizations are already deeply committed to this work. And they're already actively working to improve our quality of life, our economy, while also addressing climate change. In implementing the proposed Climate Action Plan, the city and the county recognize that engaging residents deliberately with a broad range of communities is essential to our success. While many of the actions identified in the plan are focused on a particular activity, how the actions end up being implemented is equally important. And to that end, we actually have developed an implementation plan that city agencies and county departments are using to help inform implementation of the Climate Action Plan. The Climate Action Plan proposes actions to deepen involvement with communities of color and low-income populations to help identify and implement solutions that are meaningful to their communities. We want to support existing community-based efforts and activities that address climate change, including improving access to transportation options, healthy food and parks, working with existing community organizations that are advocating for this work. And we also want to provide community-wide engagement campaigns to educate, inspire, and make accessible some of the most cost-effective and healthy, easy solutions through existing community events like our Fix Affairs, which the city already has been running for, what, Bill, 30 years? Not quite that long. 28. And lastly, the last section in our plan is government operations. And, we have to walk the talk. The city of Portland, for example, has reduced our emissions 17% since 2006. This is through a combination of efficiency improvements. I mentioned some of those earlier. It's also investment in renewables, improving our buildings, improving our more efficient lighting, more efficient heating and cooling equipment, transitioning our fleets to more sustainable fuel sources. And to be successful in these efforts to reduce emissions, we really have to model the way. And so we've focused on that at the City of Portland, and the county is doing the same thing as well. Some of these actions include some of these things I've already mentioned. I think I covered all those. So building a low-carbon future, the draft Climate Action Plan proposes numerous actions to be taken in the next 5 years to build on our success and to keep the momentum going. While transitioning away from fossil fuels, we have an opportunity to strengthen our local economy, create and maintain high-quality jobs, shift patterns of urban development, transportation, and buildings to create affordable, active, vibrant, safe, walkable neighborhoods well served by public transit. Improve community livability and public health, advance social and racial justice, and build strong, resilient infrastructure that can withstand a changing climate of the future. So with that, we're going to give you all a chance to browse the boards back there. There will be staff at each board that you can talk to and ask questions. You can fill out comment cards. You can also go to the website, which I'll show on the next slide, and submit comments online. The timeline is this gentleman at the back mentioned. April 10th is the closing of public comment period, so we have just a couple more weeks to get public comment in. We will take all of that comment. We will review it all, and we will revise the plan accordingly. And then Planning and Sustainability Commission will hear hearings on the plan, and ultimately the City Council and the County Board will vote on adoption of the plan in June 2015. And here's the website. You can download a copy of the plan, and you can submit comments by email. Thank you.